Washington University and KETC, the St. Louis Educational Television Station, present A Course for Television. The Religions of Man. With Dr. Houston Smith, Associate Professor of Philosophy of Washington University.
You have been looking at some objects of religious art from all over the world. This, for example, is a Kuan Yin, a goddess of mercy, which comes from China in the Buddhist tradition. It's really a museum piece. And that's all religion is for many people, a museum piece. But that's not the sense in which we're going to be studying it here tonight. Some of these objects, they're very different in kind. Some of them are very lovely. Take, for example, this wood carving of a monk. It comes from Europe around Oberammergau, I believe. It's beautiful. And yet, I'm not an art critic concerned to analyze the style of these various objects and compare them. Some of these objects are very old. Take, for example, this figure of Shiva, the dancing Shiva. Comes from South India. I don't know how old this particular object is, but the Shiva figure is the oldest object, religious object, which the archaeologists have dug up from India. It goes back about 5,000 years. But again, I'm not an antiquarian interested in digging up the past and dusting it off. Some of these objects are very strange. There are some strange ones up there on the shelf. Some of these are different. If one puts, for example, these two objects side by side, the Christian monk and this Hindu dancing figure, what a different impression they make. But I'm not an anthropologist interested in comparing and contrasting the various culture patterns of the world. Some of these objects also have some very strange aspects to them. Take, for example, this head of the Buddha. The head itself is very serene. But there were many things about Buddha's life which would sound very strange to you. For example, how in his quest for enlightenment, he tried for a period of time to live on one bean a day, until, as he tells us, when he reached for his stomach, he seized his spine. How he used to press the tongue up against the roof of his mouth and hold his breath so long that he would hear, as he tells us, the roaring of the oceans in his ears, and until it felt like a sword was cleaving his skull. Sometimes, when he was trying to concentrate all his attention upon his spirit, he would neglect his body completely, not even bothering to wash it, until again, as the records tell us, the dirt would accumulate until it fell off by itself. But I'm not a tourist guide interested in the shock value of the strange, the bizarre, and the fantastic. No, when I turn to these religious objects, I don't turn to them as relics. I don't turn to them even as historical forces which had great vitality and power and influence in the past, but somehow have become fossilized and outlived their usefulness. I don't turn to these sacred books, the Brahma Sutra, the Torah, in here. The other sacred books here assembled. I don't turn to them as if they were simply great literature with high poetic value, or items which would allow us to inspect the past to give us some idea how the old boys felt. No, when I turn to this religious material, when I turn to the religions of man, it is because I find here the most profound insights and answers which have ever been offered to the basic problems of life, the inescapable problems, the problems that I myself haven't been able to get away from. What, for example? Well, take the problem of suffering. I was just saying, pointing out some strange things about this man, Buddha, but there's another aspect to his life which is the part that really interests me. And this is the part of his life and teachings which speak to every man. Somehow they transcend time and space and go right to the heart of problems which are terribly near home. Buddha said, you can put my whole philosophy, really, in a nutshell. I show you suffering, and I show you the end of suffering. He would say to those who were gathered around him on the dusty roads of India, let me ask you just one question. Are you really as happy as you would like to be, as you think you might be? What about those 6 points, those danger spots in life? What about the trauma of birth, the pathology of sickness, the morbidity of decrepitude and old age when the body begins to fail, the phobia of death? What about those other 2 danger points? When you find yourself trapped with that which you hate and there's no exit, there's nothing you can do about it. Or the other side of the coin, when you find yourself separated from that which you love. How is life going? How will it go when it comes to you in this less friendly guise? If the answer is well enough indeed, then Buddha would say, in effect, to his friends, go your way. I have nothing to say to you. But if there be any pain, those of you who know the meaning of pain and want release, stay around. There may be some things I can say which will help you. And I, for one, when I hear those words, I find myself lingering. Yes, I found some things in Buddhism which speak to me very meaningfully about the problem of suffering, as likewise I have also found in Judaism, in the words, the writings of the Torah. Well, we're going to be talking about suffering, some of the answers of the world's great religions to this problem. But how about another problem? Well, let's take a problem which is very much in our public minds these days, the problem of social anarchy. This is what we're really occupied with, isn't it? It's what the papers are full of. International anarchy. We don't have a world government, and here we have the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb just poised over us. Also the problem of anarchy at home. You must have noticed, as I did, that our crime rate has jumped 100% in each of the last 2 years. That's alarming. How long can it go that way and a society still keep together? Not to mention the problem of juvenile delinquency. Now, are these religious problems? Well, in a way, I guess we think they are, but we think of them sort of as secondarily religious. For the most part, we think of them as being political problems. Oh, it's true that the President of the United States now opens his cabinet meetings with a prayer, but somehow we think of the solution to these as going on in a social sphere. But there are people on the other side of the world who view this very differently, whose religion focuses in the social problem of man, how to get along with one another without destroying each other. How can we live together in the maximum harmony and creativeness? This really is the heart of Confucius' concern. He was a believer in God. He prayed to God. He was a believer in ritual, but it was really the social problem which occupied him. Now, I don't have an object of an image of Confucius here tonight. There aren't any images of Confucius in China. I do have a little pebble that I happened to have picked up when I was at the place of his birth, and I wanted a little memento. It won't look like anything to you, but I wanted a little remembrance of that place. But let's go beyond the man to his teaching. When I first encountered the Analects of Confucius, which contain really the heart of his doctrine, it was one of the most surprising experiences I'd ever had, because here I knew that this man had influenced a civilization like few other men had ever influenced any civilization before. And yet, the amazing thing was how ordinary he was, how unimpressive. The things that he would say, for example, they seemed so obvious. Saws and old maxims. He reminded me, you know who he reminded me of in our culture? He reminded me a little bit of Bernard Baruch, a senior statesman. But what has Baruch ever said that was really dramatic? The things that he says are always the obvious sorts of things. Have a plan, or prepare for the worst, this kind of statement. And yet, he has worked his way to the senior statesman in our society by general acclaim. Confucius was sort of like that. Now, why? Why this tremendous impact? And it suddenly dawned on me that the reason was that this man had hold of the crucial question, and he refused to be distracted from it. Well, in the weeks ahead, we're going to be looking into what Confucius had to say about the social problem. And we're going to look at what some of the other religions had to say. Again, coming back to Judaism with the prophets of Israel, those tremendous figures, what they had to say about social justice. Yes, the social problems of our day will come into a kind of religious focus as we proceed in this course. Well, let me mention just one other problem. It's the problem of selfishness. Here's one that we all have with us all the time. Logically speaking, every man ought to count for just one. And I ought to be as concerned tonight about a child that doesn't have food in China as I am about my own child. But I don't feel that way. Let me put it this way. Suppose I were to show you a picture, a group picture, in which you were a member. What face would you look for first? Well, you don't need to tell me. We all search the rows to see how we came out in that picture. And yet, we know that this kind of selfishness often works against our true happiness. We find ourselves in our self-concern, standing in our own light, as it were. Well, there are things in these religions, there are things in Christianity which help me with this problem, help me as to how to overcome this to some extent, and how to live with myself, to accept myself even with that part which I am unable to overcome. Christianity has helped me on that problem. Hinduism also has some marvelous things to say on that subject. When we turn then to the religions of man, the basic reason which we will always have before us in this course is that here we find answers. Final answers, maybe, but certainly helpful answers to the deepest and most inescapable problems of human life. Now, there's another reason, however, that makes me interested in this material, and that is that there's power here. There's real power. These religions, they affect nations. They are moving forces, channeling forces in the affairs of nations. We hear of religion as a power that moves mountains. Well, that's true. More than mountains, it moves whole nations. Let's look, for example, at India. Here it is. Everybody knows about India. She's very much in the news today. She doesn't like some of the things we're doing. We don't like some of the things she's doing. But never mind. She's very much there and exercising a tremendous place in world affairs. Now let's look from the nation to a man. This man. Who is he? Well, I don't need to tell you. You know him. Everybody knows who this man is. Someone once said, are there any people who, if their pictures were flashed on a screen anywhere in the world, would be recognized? And at this time, when the person was asking that question, he suggested there were three. Charlie Chaplin, Mickey Mouse, and this man, Gandhi. So universally known that they would be recognized everywhere. Here is the man who was the power behind free India. But now let's take it back one step further. If this was the man behind the country in its move for liberation, was there a power behind the man? And I think the answer is yes. And for that power, we need to look at a book. Here it is. The Bhagavad Gita. It's an awkward name. You'll be learning to pronounce it as we go along. Gandhi's secretary once said that Gandhi's life, every moment of it, was a conscious attempt to fulfill the spirit of this book. Well, this is going to be one of the texts that we are reading in this course, and that which was a part of Gandhi will also become a part of you. And I, for my part, will be more proud because there are people in our community who know this great religious classic of another land. Now, we study the religions of the world, then, not only because they give us help in our personal problems, the ones we can't get away from. We also study them because they are moving forces in world history. But there's another reason, a final reason, why I turn to this religious material, to the religions of man. And that is because it helps us understand the other peoples of the world. Someone has once asked this question. The historians, 500 years, 1,000 years down the line, when they're writing the record of the 20th century, for what will they remember us? Will it be because we were the ones who unlocked the secret of the atomic bomb? Will our century be remembered for the spread of communism during the first half of the century at least? I don't think so. There's something about our century which overshadows the other forces, and in comparison with which the atomic bomb and communism itself will, in the perspective of history, look like mere episodes. The most important thing, I believe, about the 20th century, and that for which we will be remembered, is that this is the first century in which East and West have met each other not merely significantly, but as equals. Now, there have been plenty of meetings in the past on an insignificant and equal basis. There have also been meetings on a momentous basis, but as unequals. But today, for the first time, we find these two halves of the world looking across at one another as equal. Now, in this situation, nothing is more important, it seems to me, than world understanding. We live in a day when science has annihilated space, when the world has become not so much a globe as a globule. We live in a time when Formosa is in our backyard and India is our next-door neighbor. Now, in a time like this, nothing is more important than that the peoples of the world understand one another. Now, I'm not saying that there has been no understanding in the past. Certainly there has. Thoreau, for example, over 100 years ago, could say that his life had been made by two books, Emerson's essay on nature and the Bhagavad Gita, which we were just looking at. Schopenhauer could say of the Upanishads, one of which we shall also be reading, that in the whole world there is no study so beautiful and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life, it will be the solace of my death. Certainly there have been exchanges in the past, but now today these exchanges are crescendoing. That which was merely a trickle is becoming a torrent of interchange. That which was only a whisper is now becoming a roar. Our very lives now are closely interlocked with the lives of other men. The daily paper carries an account of stories from 26 countries in the world. Some of the interrelations between the peoples are of a very trivial nature. You know, for example, like Cracker Jack. Everybody knows about Cracker Jack. My children like to pull out little favors, whistles, and the like. Last summer, do you know what one of my girls pulled out from a Cracker Jack box? Here it is. Let's see if we can see it. You see it? It's a choral reproduction of Shiva. This is Shiva, the image that we were just looking at. Well, Cracker Jack, it's trivial, it's a humorous symbol of the West, and yet Cracker Jack and Shiva, it's a kind of symbol of our time. Now, not all the symbols are trivial of this kind. Let me tell you one other, which again to me is a kind of symbol. This is concerns Robert Oppenheimer. I suppose there's no one whose name the public links more with the discovery of the atomic bomb than Robert Oppenheimer. He stands in a way as a kind of symbol for the West. Well, do you remember back to 1945 when the first experimental bomb was exploded on the desert of the sands of Alamogordo? We didn't know about it. It was secret then, but the story came out later. And the reporters crowded around Oppenheimer afterwards, and they asked him, what went through your mind during those final seconds as they were ticking away? 4, 3, 2, 1, down to 0. And Oppenheimer said, well, frankly, I can't remember. I suppose I was concentrating so much on whether the bomb would go off to think about anything else. But I do remember that when the explosion took place, the brilliant, blinding flash and the mushroom cloud rose up, there flashed through my mind a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Behold, I am come as death, the waster of peoples. This, too, is a kind of symbol to me of man's interrelatedness. This man, a symbol of the West, but in this crucial moment in human history, what flashes through his mind? A verse from halfway around the world over 2,000 years ago. We live then in a time when any man who is only an American, who is only an Indian, who is only a European or only an Asiatic, is only half human. The other, the universal aspect of his life, has yet to be born. And those of you who follow us through this material will emerge, I feel sure, citizens of the world in a dimension that you have never been before. Now, let me come back in closing to religious art. It's wonderful, it's beautiful. We could fill the studio with marvelous examples. Michelangelo, the Sistine ceiling, we could have the reproductions here. We could have Bach's music filling this room. They're not here. They won't be here. And why not? The answer is because we're not really interested in the aesthetic side. We're interested in the source of this great art, the ideas. In a way, you and I here will be standing parallel to Michelangelo and to Bach. We'll be looking at the things that they looked at when they created these works of art. Now, this is going to be a course. There's going to be system in it. There's going to be rigor. There's going to be a good deal of hard work, too. I just thought this morning, it's rather a surprise, I'm going to be on TV. I'm going to have a program. I'm going to be a performer in a way. And yet, I'm not. I'm not a performer. I'm a teacher. And those of you who follow me seriously are students. You're going to be reading assignments. You're going to take an examination. Will it be worth it? Well, ultimately the answer is yours. But two quotations come into my mind. One is that of the medical teacher who says to his students, we're going to be dealing with flesh, with nerves, with sinews. We're going to be dealing with them in a cold-blooded way. But never forget, fellows, this stuff is alive. And that's what I hope you'll never forget during these lectures. The final quote, I think, really, we could come back to Buddha when he says to his people, those of you who have no problems, go your way. We have nothing to say to you. But if there be any pain, then linger. Those of you who know the meaning of pain and wish release, follow me.
The Religions of Man is produced by Washington University and KETC, the St. Louis Educational Television and Production Center.